Before we start the show, please don't forget to subscribe to ClimateTech with Kentaro on your favorite podcast app if you haven't already. While you're there, you can also rate and leave us a review. Help us reach more listeners and build a community of climate tech enthusiasts and problem solvers. Thanks for your support, and now on to today's episode. You mentioned the 4 items, and the immediate one that stood out was planetary computer. What the heck is that?
Well, that's a great thing to talk about. It is very clear that as a world of data that we have figured out how to track and monetize the planet's people. And now with the planetary computer, we're doing the inverse. We're saying we are going to protect the people's planet.
This is Climate Tech with Kentaro, a podcast featuring the brightest minds and most influential voices in climate tech. I'm your host, Kentaro Kawamori. Okay, our next guest is just a super cool and awesome dude. Mark Kroese is a 22-year Microsoft veteran and currently works as their General Manager of Sustainability Solutions. Mark started his career at Microsoft in the 90s as a product manager for Word and Excel. A couple of products you've probably used in the past. He'll tell us more about that in a bit. Now, like a lot of people, I know whom I think are very lucky. Sometimes their personal passions and their professional path collide. For Mark, his love for mountain climbing and visits to the rainforest led him to focus on sustainability. In this episode, Mark shared his thoughts on sustainability reporting and building databases for that information. I also appreciated his comments on the environmental impact of data. We talked about how much water data centers use and the environmental impact of our thousands of saved messages and emails. My biggest takeaway from this conversation is that I need to go clean my inbox to save the planet.
Well, so I'm a boomerang Microsoft employee. So I was at the company in the early years. I started my career in the ad agency business. I came into Microsoft in a Marcom type role. I then became the lead product manager for Excel back in the early days, and Excel became then the group product manager for Word, and Excel became Office, and we rode that thing from a $200 million business to a $60 billion business. So my roots are in business productivity. My functional role has always been at the intersection of product development and product design and demand creation, right? So classic kind of product management background. By 2012, I had sort of done what I wanted to do in that space, and I started becoming a lot more concerned about the world around me. In parallel, I've always been a mountaineer and a climber, and I've enjoyed going into the mountains and having these crazy adventures all over the world. And, one of my favorite places to climb is in our own Cascade Mountains here in Washington State. And I don't know, I think it was about 2009, I had gone on a trip that had gone on the same trip about 20 years earlier. And I had this 20-year-old paper map or maybe 25-year-old paper map, and we're navigating on this cross-country route, and I see that I'm looking down at this lake, and I'm like, why is that lake not on the map? And I realized that the lake is at the terminus of this 3-mile-long glacier called the Honeycomb Glacier, and that glacier is now 2.5 miles long, and there's a half-mile lake at the base. It's not on my map because my map's 25 years old. And that really hit me. I'm like, wow, in my short lifetime of tromping around in these mountains, that glacier went from being 3 miles long to 2.5 miles long, and there's a new lake that's not on the map. And I've had many similar experiences just watching glacial recession, devastation of ecosystems, sort of just, forest. We now have this lexicon in the Pacific Northwest. It's fire season, right? We have forest fires. So a lot of the places that I've gone that were green and pristine are now burnt out and stuff. So it's this kind of this dystopian view where you're like, wow, this is happening in front of my eyes in my my lifetime is very short in a geological blink of an eye. So that got me really motivated. And I got involved with a bunch of forest preservation projects, one in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the Asanji and Chopolomami provinces, And that was a RED project, REDD, reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And we went and created that project, which spits out carbon credits. They're avoided emissions offsets because they stopped the logging concession and we turned it into an ecosystem services concession. Then I got, through a foundation I'm involved in, I got involved with some work in Suriname, which is that little country north of Brazil, tucked between the Guyanas. And we essentially saved Suriname and put it into permanent protection. So it was super gratifying. Suriname is 97% forested intact. The rainforest is 97% intact. So it has retained its distinction as the greenest country on Earth. And we worked with Conservation International and essentially rezoned Suriname to create the Central Suriname Conservation Corridor, which keeps 60% of that country in permanent protection. And it's just the most lush, pristine, amazing rainforest you'll ever see. Totally crazy, wild place. Boars and animals and snakes and everything that can kill you. Anyway, all of that work got me awarded a fellowship at Harvard. So I spent a year at Harvard studying climate change and going deeper. And that's really when I went, wow, forest preservation is great, but there's a lot about energy systems and the way we consume energy and the way we live. And I kind of got a much bigger zoom out view of the problem. And that's what motivated me really to do more work at scale.
I mean, that's quite a hell of a journey you've had, and I learned a ton there. The country you mentioned between Brazil and the Guyanas, what was the name again?
Suriname.
Suriname.
Yeah.
Tells you how good my geography is.
Yeah. It's right up there. It's a former Dutch colony, and I'm Dutch. It's very comfortable to go there.
Oh, okay.
Everyone looks like my parents, and the Dutch turned out to be actually really nasty slave owners, and those who escaped the slave trade just sort of disappeared deeply into the heart of darkness on dugout canoes, survived malaria, yellow fever. It's super tropical, and it's just a crazy place. If you look at it on a map, and I could share some photos with you. I've been there a couple of times now to see the fruits of our labor. And one of the things that I really learned on that trip is that deforestation, the world's about 50% deforested now. Deforestation is super simple to understand. It is a symptom of poverty. Full stop. When somebody wakes up and they have a choice that says, gee, today should I feed my kids and cut a tree or not cut a tree? You're always going to choose the former. You're always going to feed your kids. So the idea of creating a monetization vehicle that enables people to get paid for not cutting down the forest, to be able to look at the forest as a global asset and it's the lungs of the world, is really a relatively new idea. And the carbon markets are the thing that enable that. So it's been great to sort of learn about that. We still have a lot of work to do in that space in creating those carbon markets. But the idea that you should get paid to not cut down your trees is an important idea, and one that has great traction with the UN now. And, you look at land use and you realize we need more reforestation projects. So a lot of the work I've done prior to coming back to Microsoft is in that space.
So tell us a little bit about your role, what you're up to. Very, very excited to learn about, specifically on the product side and tech side, what you guys are working on, because you've been leaders on offsets and ambitions and standards and policy for so long in the space. Very, very excited to hear what you guys are up to.
Yeah. So my role at Microsoft is I'm the general manager of what we call sustainability solutions. And think of that really as an externally facing role. So in 2020, the company stood up 4 huge commitments, and that is to be carbon negative, water positive, zero waste company that is protecting ecosystems by building a planetary computer. So think of those as internal operational commitments. And what happens is that, as the company is trying to deliver on our own operational commitments, we're learning a lot and we're building a lot of tech ourselves. And of course, you don't have to think very hard to realize that all of our customers are going through the same journey. Microsoft is huge in the enterprise, and all of our enterprise customers are coming to us and saying, hey, we're trying to figure out the sustainability thing. Can you help us out? So we are helping them out. We have this internal initiative called Customer One, where really everything we're learning, we're trying to productize. So that shows up in things like the cloud for sustainability, for example. So my role is really externally focused. It includes oversight of our commercial product strategy, as well as our $1 billion climate innovation fund, and then a few other things as well. But the way I think about it is Microsoft's emissions are 0.03% of global emissions. So when we make and deliver on our operational commitments by 2030, we'll have fully gotten our own house in order, but we'll only have solved 0.03% of the climate problem.
Mark's job goes beyond sustainability solutions at Microsoft. He is, in fact, given the enormous task of looking at ways to make the rest of the world more sustainable.
One of the cool things about Microsoft is we have agency and we have the ability to contribute to the other 99.97%. And really that's my role, is to work with customers, partners, build that ecosystem, and make sure that we build tech that can help our customers.
The cool thing about Microsoft is you have such a global leadership position in technology and in setting the pathways and influencing the way it should be done in policies and all of those things. So that's very exciting. You mentioned the 4 items, and the immediate one that stood out was planetary computer. What the heck is that?
Well, that's a great thing to talk about. You know, if you think about the last 20, but really say the last 10 years, and you look at the confluence of mobile phone, social media, and paid search, it is very clear that as a world of data that we have figured out how to track and monetize the planet's people. And now with the planetary computer, we're doing the inverse. We're saying we are going to protect the people's planet. And the people's planet has lots of data now, because if you think about it, we now have a necklace of satellites around the world that is constantly sensing environmental data, ecosystems data, ocean acidification, land use, land cover, forest mapping, fires, everything is just being recorded. And then we have millions and millions of IoT sensors. You know, there's IoT sensors in coral reefs, in jungles, in soil, it's everywhere. So we have all of this data. But the problem with that data is it's not aggregated and it's not in one place. So the idea of the planetary computer is to do something that Microsoft is very well suited to do, is to build a platform and to aggregate all of that data into one spot so that it can be shared, really to create a two-sided marketplace for that data, because the data has a head, you know, big data sets like Sentinel and Marksan and like the big data sets, but it has a long tail. You know, as an example, I was on a flight back from Austria, and the guy sitting next to me was a scientist, and he was coming back from Greenland, and he was measuring the salinity of water off the coast of Greenland. The bad news is you can now go like, you know, a quarter mile out and there's no salinity because it's melting so fast. But he's a scientist and he has a data set. Where is he going to publish that data set? He's going to publish it on his university website, but he really needs to share it with a lot of people, and he doesn't have a place to put it. So think of the planetary computer as the GitHub of geospatial data. It is a place where everything can come together. There can be a two-sided marketplace. Public and private data sets can come together and then be reasoned over, overlaid, and really derive planetary insights.
GitHub is a collaborative platform for coding, and as Mark will explain momentarily, having such a central database for sustainability is important. It enables scientists and experts from around the world to easily share information.
And there's a ton of different applications for such a platform. One that comes to mind is climate risk management. So our government regulations, if you just look at Europe, you can see what's coming here in the United States. There's a lot of regulation that's coming around companies, public companies needing to disclose the risk to physical assets. And the planetary computer can really be a base platform for applications that enable that. So you can look at risk to physical assets, buildings, properties, plants, equipment, this sort of thing, and get a much finer grained view of it. That's just one example. So We're excited about the world of planetary insights and really helping track and to measure, monitor, and manage the world's ecosystems.
That's the first time I've heard anyone at Microsoft describe it as the GitHub of geospatial and sustainability data, which I think is brilliant. And now you all are the GitHub of GitHub, and you're the GitHub of sustainability. It's wonderful. And I was just cruising the latest data sets on the planetary computer. Wow, that has grown exponentially since the last time I looked at it, maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
So you guys are clearly making a lot of progress there.
We are. It's a product that is in transition from incubation to becoming a mainstream engineering project at Microsoft. So it has been incubated in the Central Environmental Sustainability Group. My team is not a place long-term for a large-scale engineering project. So the idea is then it graduates in sort of a VC style, graduation out of incubation into a larger Microsoft engineering org. And that transition is happening now. The team has made tremendous progress. I mean, we have, a preview product out there. We've got, dozens of commercial customers already using it. We have various groups inside the company taking a dependency on what we've built. So we've got traction in the startup mentality. We've got customers, we've got traction, we've got a mandate, and it's really cool to see it moving forward.
That's excellent. So planetary computer clearly intended to enable new use cases by making that geospatial data more accessible. I would guess a combination of corporates, new climate tech startups, existing climate tech startups, all of that. And then you have this broader umbrella that is the sustainability cloud. How does that fit into that? And maybe walk us through that.
Yeah, so the sustainability cloud is at a much higher level of maturity than the planetary computer. So it is a mainstream commercial offering.
The Sustainability Cloud is a business tool offered by Microsoft for companies to track and report environmental impacts.
And again, if you go back to our own operational commitment to be carbon negative as one of the four, we are doing a lot in that space in terms of buying carbon removal credits and, of course, tracking and trying to reduce all of our own emissions. And we've built a lot of tech to do that. We have this thing internally that's called the Sustainability Data Platform. And we are now transitioning all of that work so that we are customer one of the Cloud for Sustainability. The Cloud for Sustainability is a broad umbrella. It is consistent with our industry cloud strategy. So we have, cloud for manufacturing, cloud for retail, for healthcare, for FinServ. We have all of these industry clouds, and the Cloud for Sustainability is the latest entrant into the industry cloud family at Microsoft. It's a little different in the sense that it is the industry cloud team by definition is kind of vertical. It is a horizontal I call it a vertizonal. It is a horizontal within a vertical world because the base sustainability, and you know this well from your work, the base sustainability use case is a very horizontal one. You've got to get data from all these different systems of record into other systems of record. So, and creating a new system of record of sustainability data. So that's what the Cloud for Sustainability does in its initial version. We created the name, the Cloud for Sustainability, to give it broad latitude to grow over time. So version 1 is a scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon accounting platform. Same business that you're in. Over time, of course, we will grow that and add new capabilities. You can imagine the planetary computer discussion we just had, tucking into that. You can imagine things like carbon marketplaces. There's lots of places to grow. The customer journey that we are trying to solve for is what we call the 3 R's: record, report, reduce. It's actually the 5 R's. It's record, report, reduce, remove, and replace. Replace being replace, say, dirty energy with renewable energy. But that's the journey every customer is on, irrespective of industry. And the Cloud for Sustainability is designed to help customers along that journey.
One of the commitments that Microsoft made that Mark mentioned earlier is to be water positive. And that strikes me because I'm based in Arizona. Water is top of mind here in the desert, of course, and Microsoft's commitment to replenish more water than it consumes by 2030 is huge for a tech company. Mark says housing data takes a lot of water.
The average data center uses enough water for about a town of about 30,000 people on an annualized basis. So the last thing you want to do is to come in to a town and be the people who made the water more expensive or more scarce. So in any place that we operate a data center, and we have 254 and growing, the goal is to come in and replenish more water locally than you use. Separately, we're also working on like really low water use data centers. That plan varies depending on whether they're very further north or south. It's a little easier to do in the north for cooling. But yeah, water is the lingua franca of this century. It is the most, it just doesn't get enough attention. And, you live in sort of ground zero. I look at the whole Los Angeles and, that whole Southwest region, the water tables there. And yeah, there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it can't be understated, especially on the data center side, how voracious the appetite for resource those are, right? I used to be an owner and operator of a tier 1 data center when I was at Chesapeake Energy, and this just never ceases to amaze the amount of power and water those things need. For us, actually, it was so drastic. The founder of the company had actually looked at it from a long-term cost perspective, which was quite fascinating, and built an entire water chilling plant around the data center, which also provided that resource to the campus. And so the efficiency was through the roof in comparison to, using traditional AC units on that. So you guys are at the forefront of that, but yeah, it's shocking how much power and water is consumed by those things. And I don't think the average consumer realizes the environmental cost of the Zoom call or the Netflix movie that we're on.
That's right. It's, I heard an anecdote. I haven't had it actually scientifically confirmed, but that a year's worth of accumulated data for the average knowledge worker, all of the saved emails and stuff you put on cloud storage, is equivalent to a flight from Seattle to New York and back every year.
Wow.
So this idea of just deleting stuff, right? Like my pet Teams meeting feature I want is like if you record the Teams meeting and you're the last person to watch it, maybe it can be deleted. Some stuff needs to be, for compliance reasons, kept, of course, but we just need to delete more stuff, And on the data center side, we have a whole team that is the data center innovation team, and they are looking at, they have this really inspiring spec for the future of the data center. And, one of the things about the future data center is the land use is like 3 acres, not 30. So whether it's water use, land use, energy consumption, of course, by 2025, 100% of Microsoft's energy usage will come from 100% renewable energy on an annualized basis. And by 2030, it will be 100% matched on an hourly basis, which is really hard to do, spatiotemporally matching energy sources and uses. So whether it's energy, water, or land use, we're super, super cognizant of just not coming into a town and thumping your chest and being like, oh, we're creating a bunch of jobs and having other bad environmental impacts. It's an and both. You need to create jobs and not have environmental impacts in the places that you operate.
To your point, you have to have this cross-industry sort of approach, but you absolutely need, deep industry vertical integration and solution offerings as part of that. So makes a ton of sense, and there's few better to do that than Microsoft. Also very, very exciting when we saw the sustainability manager offering coming out. It's a great validation for the space. You all have one of the biggest install bases in the world. So we're super pleased to see you sort of investing from a product perspective into that. I think the great thing about the sustainability cloud offerings and the planetary computer concepts are they're great enablers, but it is still a barrier to entry for non-technical companies to simply be able to consume, right? So I think that's a good melding of both approaches.
That's right. And I think one of the cool things about all of this is that, we look at the offering from Salesforce.com, from SAP, from you guys, from Watershed. We're all going to make each other better. I'm a big tennis fan, and I love to quote Roger Federer, who talks about how Rafael Nadal and him have had this rivalry for decades, and they've just made each other better. And, each acknowledges that they wouldn't be as good as they are without the other. And I think we're all going to make each other better. This is a place where competition is a great thing, and the end customer wins in that world. So I think the pace of innovation is going to really, really step up here. we're really in this for climate impact. And, we're setting all of our goals for both the planetary computer and the cloud for sustainability in terms of climate impact goals, less than a traditional or different than a traditional kind of revenue and market share focus that you would have in a normal commercial offering. So that's the way we're thinking about it. And the metrics we're setting ourselves for, like with planetary computer, it's, environmental assets under management, sort of like a financial firm has, an AUM. We're thinking of environmental assets under management as a goal, as opposed to, commercial revenue and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's always refreshing and great to see, such a great Microsoft rep thinking about the world from that same perspective. I was working in the Microsoft channel 2013, 14, and that was like the very beginning of Microsoft's cultural transformation, where it didn't have to be all out cutthroat competition everywhere. And yeah, I'll never forget, it's probably part of Microsoft lore at this point, I would imagine, when Satya stood on stage and they had the big I Heart Linux background announcing collaboration with Red Hat. And that's kind of the same way that I see this.
Yeah. It's, what's really been great about the cultural transformation of Microsoft and big tech in general is if you think about Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, these are companies that represent 23% of the NASDAQ. I mean, huge and have material impact in most major economies in the world. And you get to this point where you realize that if the world around you is not doing well, you can't do well. People often ask, why is Microsoft so focused on climate and sustainability? And the answer is really two-part. There's an idealistic and a pragmatic answer. The idealistic thing is, we believe that any company that has great resources should use those for good, and that it is our responsibility to lift up the developing world, recognize that the vulnerable and those most affected by climate change are the ones who least caused it, right? So we have to have that idealistic view. And at the same time, we have to have a pragmatic view, which is if the world around you is not doing well, if your customers are not doing well, you don't have a business. So you better invest in the world around you if you want to continue to have a business when you get to be that big. And that's really the way we think about it, both pragmatically and idealistically.
You mentioned kind of the broader landscape, right? And I think part of the exciting thing is, there's, by our estimations, upwards of 50,000 companies that are going to need some sort of solution, like our joint solutions over the next 5 years or so. And there's just no possible hope any one company can achieve that. So to your point, more competition is good. And I actually see it more of as kind of a maturing of the space. I think, you're going to see certain segments, industries, markets are going to have different players because there's different needs. Do you expect, the announcements that you've just made and kind of the investments by Microsoft as a whole more into the product space are going to spawn others like a Google or an Amazon, which you guys compete with more traditionally on the cloud infrastructure side, but less on the application side? How do you see that shaking out?
Yeah, it's anyone's guess, but we greatly respect the work that Google's doing, as well as Amazon in this space. They certainly have the ability to create great products and bring them together. We're all coming at this from an angle of our strengths. So, Microsoft is an amazing enterprise company, and Google is an amazing consumer company if you think of most of their services. So, how it all lands, like we've seen Google do this great thing with their mapping, which is, helping you get from point A to point B in the most carbon efficient way. I mean, that's just a natural thing for Google to do. We are coming out with the cloud for sustainability, which is mostly an enterprise play at this point. Eventually, it'll come down to be simple enough for SMBs. That's a natural thing for us to do. Amazon will take a different focus. So we're all coming at this from a position of core competencies, but the Venn diagram of overlap, I think, is large. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And again, I think in the end of the day, the end customer wins because we're all going to make each other better.
Yeah, I totally agree. Right. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of the software business is everybody is competing to some degree, probably at scale, but the value propositions and the kind of core use case strengths, as you point out, tend to be very, very different. Let's shift gears a little bit, maybe more on the consuming side of it, right? So you all are big investors, as you pointed out. You mentioned that you're quite involved in some of those things in climate tech broadly, but I imagine you're probably also a customer. I know you're doing pretty cool things around specifically the campus on net zero technology solutions. Anything recent you think worth highlighting or exciting that you've been looking at?
As a company, we've got 254 data centers. We're building data centers. We're building this fancy new campus that's, half a mile from where I'm sitting right now. And there's a lot to talk about there in terms of how that is going to be a showcase of sustainability. And then separately, we've got our Climate Innovation Fund and how we're investing. And there's actually a pretty interesting relationship between those two, right? Our new campus is really going to be amazing. I mean, green steel, green concrete. It's got a geothermal well, like all electric, no natural gas. So, our real estate and facilities team just had the opportunity to take a zero-based approach and said, what would the dream campus look like? By coincidence, the light rail project that's in the greater Seattle area is, comes right to the Redmond campus now. So we've got all these overpasses and, charging stations and e-bikes and, the whole employee experience is really going to be great. And so that's exciting. And at the same time, as I said, we have this $1 billion Climate Innovation Fund, which is a venture style fund, and it is an impact fund first and foremost. So one of the four principles of our investment in that fund is to invest in things that we call its alignment. And that alignment is both to our product strategy, filling holes in our roadmap, creating an ecosystem around the cloud for sustainability. And there's also operational alignment. So when we invest in a company like Carbon Cure, which makes low carbon concrete, we're also building into that agreement offtake. Right? So we want to buy their concrete, right? And it goes to all of, we're investing in a lot of things where there are building materials, cross-laminated timber, Prometheus materials. We just invested in them recently. So when we invest, we are also investing in offtake. We're a large lender to the LanzaJet Freedom Pines Sustainable Aviation Fuel project in Georgia. We, of course, want the offtake because we have a lot of employee travel. We've recently raised our employee travel carbon fee, by the way, to $100 per ton. I don't know of any company that is even higher than that. So we need sustainable aviation fuels. So if you look at the 38 investments we've made in our Climate Innovation Fund, many of them have both product and operational alignment at their core because we want to invest in supply. The biggest place we really need supply is in carbon removal. Durable carbon removal. We don't buy offsets. We don't judge anyone who does.
Carbon offsets are a way for companies or individuals to decrease their carbon footprint and compensate for their carbon emissions, like flying on an airplane. Carbon offsets can be seen as a tradable right or certificate linked to activities that lower CO2 emissions. By buying these certificates, a person or group can fund projects that fight climate change, but not necessarily lower their own carbon emissions. Here's where carbon removal comes in. Carbon removal looks at activities like reforestation that actually sequester or pull carbon out of the atmosphere.
I mean, offsets are a good thing, but we wanted to take it a step further and buy durable carbon removal. As a company with 0.03% of global emissions, last year we bought 50% of about half of the global carbon removal supply. So you can see right there, we do not have a functioning market, right? If you think about 51 billion metric tons of carbon going into the air and that going to net zero, I think that's kind of 30-ish of reduction and 20-ish of removal. And if you look at 20 gigatons at $100 a ton, that's a $2 trillion market. And we do not have a $2 trillion market today. We have a market and it's in the hundreds of millions. So we are investing in supply, and we are trying to the two verbs that really drive the Climate Innovation Fund are innovate and accelerate. So when we invest in LanzaJet, we're trying to accelerate sustainable aviation fuels. Climeworks in Zurich, Switzerland, we're trying to accelerate direct air capture, right? So And again, there's an idealistic and a pragmatic motive behind all of those. We want everybody to be able to participate in these markets, and we want ourselves to be able to participate more easily.
Wow, fascinating. I imagine if you're on the Redmond campus, the most dangerous incident might be an Amazon employee mistakenly getting across town from Seattle to the campus and realizing they're in enemy territory.
Yeah.
And with that terrible joke, we'll sign off before I embarrass myself further. But thanks again for coming on, and hope to do it again in the future.
Thanks, Kentaro. Appreciate it. And thanks for all the great work your company's doing.
Make sure to check out Mark Kroese and his work at Microsoft. Links are in our show notes as always. Before we go, please don't forget to subscribe to ClimateTech with Kentaro on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with another fantastic episode next week. Catch you all then. ClimateTech with Kentaro is produced by our incredible team at Persefoni and Hueman Group Media. Our theme music is by Guest House. And if you want to learn more about Persefoni and our climate management and accounting platform, please visit our website at persefoni.com.